Yeah, I've got a little thing about banks. Sorry, this is just a little interlude about banks, so you're not listening to me talking about various funds all the time. Don't you just love them? They get a lot of criticism. There are no good, for me, there are no good banks, only good bank managers. If you get a good bank manager, you've got a chance. If you get a bad bank manager, it doesn't matter how good the bank is. Because generally what happens when you're applying for money from a bank, it goes to your bank manager and he talks to you or she talks to you and they loves you, loves the presentation, and then goes back to what's called credit. They keep them in dark rooms and they make a decision. They say, no, you can't have it. And if your bank manager's good, they'll persuade them why they should do it. But if your bank manager's rubbish, it just never happens. So, what do I say? They aren't going to lend you on an unsecured basis. There is very, very little what you'd call unsecured debt. And when I say unsecured debt, that means Karen, it's your, Karen, isn't it? Yeah, Karen, me lending 10 grand to Karen and saying, just pay me back when you can. I'm going to say, Karen, here's 10 grand, and I want you to personally guarantee it. And I know you've got a house with loads of equity in, et cetera, et cetera. That's what securitizing a loan is, and that's what banks will do. There's so little unsecured lending. You might get 500 quid. They are lending. You know, to be fair, the banks still lend more money than anybody else. They don't like everybody. They tend to have sectors that they go on and off from time to time. So things like property was really bad for a while. They're still not over keen on pubs and clubs and cafes that tend to open and shut, as in open and then shut down. They don't like lap dancing bars because of reputational risk. They don't like bookies because of reputational risk and money laundering issues. So there's certain sectors they don't, but at the minute, they're not too bad. And there are many other sources of finance. So if you don't like them, change your bank. Seriously, get a good bank manager. Find out who your bank manager is. They say it's just by phone. Don't listen to them. Go to another bank that will be prepared to talk to you. Because whether you borrow from a bank or not, the chances are you're going to need a bank at some point in time. I have a guy who I was trying to get some money for. I was asking him about his equity and did he have any equity in his property? He said no, he didn't. He just lost his house to his third wife. I then started talking to him about his bank, and he hated his bank, but he wouldn't change his bank. But he changed his wife 3 times, but he wouldn't change his bank. Seriously, he wouldn't. He said, no, I've been with him for 20 years, NatWest it was, and he wouldn't change his bank. So I get really frustrated by people who don't change the banks, don't change their accountants, don't change the lawyers, because they've always been with them. But you'd change any other service that you get, but not these. So, my view, banks, they're just a service. Use them. Patricia, Northern Powerhouse Fund. I've got a slide on that. Yeah, the Northern Powerhouse Fund was originally conceived by George Osborne before he left his Chancellor of Exchequer position, and then taken on presumably by Philip Hammond. There are 3 elements to the Northern Powerhouse Fund. Just when BFS want to appear on every slide, they now appear on this slide with another loan, which interestingly enough, is from 25 grand to 100 grand. So it's in the same space as that other Manchester Loan Fund, but this element is called the Northern Powerhouse Fund. And the reason it's slightly different is, first of all, it's 25 grand to 100. Secondly, it is for the North, whereas that other fund was just for Greater Manchester. And depending, if you're let's say you're applying for 30 grand, they would tell you which suited best, which was the best fund for you, whether it's the Manchester Loan Fund or the Northern Powerhouse element. They don't cover Merseyside, but they certainly cover Cheshire Warrington. They cover Lancs, I think. I'm not sure about Cumbria. But the Northern Powerhouse Fund is a fund not just for the North West, it is also for the North East. So it goes over into Yorkshire and Sunderland and up that way. So that's the first loan fund. The second loan fund is from 100,000 to 750, and that's run by a company called FW Capital. So that is in competition with a fund that I mentioned a few slides ago called the Greater Manchester Loan Fund, because that was 100 to 750. 100 to 500, sorry. But that's run by FW Capital. I love FW Capital. They've just lent 200 grand to one of my clients, so I'm really happy with them. It took an age to get it through, but they did. They're looking for more established businesses. But again, they've got a lot of money to get out there. This fund has got to be... One thing you'd say about funds, government funds, is they always employ a fund manager to look after them. So it could be a BFS, FW Capital, whatever. These fund managers want to perform. They want to show that, A, they can get the money out and they create jobs, but they also want to show that they don't lose money. Because it's our money, it's your taxpayers' money, it's my taxpayers' money. So what tends to happen, I found, is in the early stages of a fund, they're a bit conservative, they're a bit negative, and they don't take many risks. But as you go through the fund and it gets towards the end, because it's typically a 5-year fund, they need to get the money out the door, because what they don't want to do is go back to the government and say, here's 25 million back, because we couldn't find anybody to lend to or to invest in. So I'm not saying wait 3 years, because this fund's been going for over a year now, but nevertheless, you do tend to get better deals at the back end of a fund than the early stages. Anyway, that is a loan fund for the North. And the other, the equity fund, which maybe hopefully of interest to some people, is quite a strange fund, because it's a £50,000 to £2 million equity fund. And that's such a strange spread, because the work they have to do for a 50 grand deal is the same as the work they have to do for a £2 million deal. And from a cost benefit point of view for the fund manager, that's not great. Did anybody go to I think it's called a huddle that they hold at the Landing last week? Maven were talking last week at the huddle at the Landing. And they were saying that their average deal size on this fund is 500,000, which I think is really high. I've been at events where Maven have been talking, and I've said that, you've got this 50, it says 50,000. I think they should have split the fund into two, made a 50 grand to 250 grand and then a 250 grand to 2 million. But they haven't. We are where we are. All I would say is, if you don't apply, you don't get it. I've just applied for somebody today for a proposal for this fund. And you go online, you just go on Maven Capital Partners, it's called. You just go on there and have a look. And it's a very simple application. Maven Capital Partners. But they've done a lot of deals. If you go, I would suggest you get some of the business emails that I get. MEN, Insider, there's various business emails, because Maven often put their deals on there. So as I say, they don't like everything. I think, being honest, I think they're a little bit risk averse at the minute. Like I said, they're a little bit... There are so many good deals out there. They're investing stuff that, to be honest, could get investment without this fund. And it's a bit annoying that they're just creaming off some of the really nice stuff. So personal view, I like Maven. They have invested in some people that I'm involved with, but nevertheless, I just wish they'd take a little bit more risk. But if you don't apply, you don't get. So, right, what's next? Who else is lending? This is still debt, by the way. I know I've just talked about equity, but that's only because it was in the Northern Powerhouse. This is equity. This is debt. Crowdfunders. The main crowdfunding websites are people like Funding Circle. You'll see splashed all over the place. I don't know if you know ThinCats. ThinCats are another one. There are others. There used to be people called RateSetter, but they've just pulled out the market. The interesting thing about these, if you have been trading, and I don't know whether you have or you haven't, but if you have been trading, that's quite good. They tend to look backwards rather than forwards. So when I started working with these guys, and I said, I'll send you the forecast, and they said, no, we don't want the forecast, we don't care. All they care about is historically, how have you done? So financial accounts for the last 2 years. So typically they want 2 years trading. They really like you to be profitable. It's really hard to get funding out of these guys if you're not. So if you've made significant losses, these are not the people to go to. But it's a good way of funding your business. I wouldn't say it's not. It's more expensive than a bank's going to be. It's going to be similar to what BFS and some of those are going to be, and it's based on risk. You'll need you need 2 years, typically 2 years trading, current bank statements, current management accounts, but you don't have to do a forecast. You don't have to do a business plan. They just do it based on that. So that's crowdfunding. So you put it on, and it gets funded either by institutions or by Mrs. Miggins, who puts a grand in, and Mr. Jones, who puts you know.
Sorry, is it just that is Funding Circle a specific company, or just generally all the crowdfunding companies tend to only offer?
Certainly, Funding Circle by far the biggest in this field. There are other. I mean, so this isn't equity crowd. This is just debt crowdfunding. I would say that of the ones that I see, which I've worked with these guys, Rate Setter, but they've pulled out the market. Because they're the slickest that I know, that's who I work with. I put deals to them from time to time.
Crowdcube has like many different options.
But Crowdcube is much more equity based. Yeah. So this is purely debt.
Can you clarify the difference, Graham? So debt crowdfunding.
Debt crowdfunding is.
They lend me the money.
Yeah,
You have to pay it back.
you have to pay it back, and you have to pay it back from the start. So it's just a loan. Yeah, it's just a loan. It's just that you fund it from the crowd, as in, so you could get, as I say, the crowd building up. So you could have effectively 100 people, say, putting in £1,000, but you don't know that there's 100 people putting in £1,000. You don't care about them at all. You've just borrowed 100 grand from Funding Circle. You pay Funding Circle the monthly amount plus the interest, and they then divvy that back. They say on their website, or they did do, that the average return that a lender will get is about 8-point-something%. So if you compare that to what you get in the bank, that's really good. But then there's risk attached to it, because the bank, you know, you're going to get 0.5% or whatever it is, 0.25%. But here you might get 8, so 16 times that, but then it might go bump. So, you know, you've got to weigh that up. And this is not investment advice, but I know many people who do it on here. And some don't care. Some just say, "Oh, you know, just invest it where you think." But some are quite specific and go on and look at it. So crowdfunding debt is you have to pay it back. Crowdfunding equity, which we'll come to, is just an equity deal. Current management accounts. Right. Who else is lending? Oh, right. Yeah, various sector funds. So sometimes you get funds that are geographic. We talked about Greater Manchester type funds and MSIF. Sometimes you get sector funds. There aren't so many around at the minute, but there are one or two. And to be honest, there are just probably too many for me to go through, but I just wanted to raise a few because I didn't know what people did here. There is a Manchester Life Science, or Manchester and Cheshire Life Science Fund, which is mainly run from, I think it's the Alderley Park on the way past Alderley Edge and near Prestbury and stuff like that. But you've got to be into life sciences. Creative England, I do some work with Creative England. I sit on their investment board from time to time, and we get applications from people for funding. They're a government quango. They get money from the government, and they invest it in digital creative businesses. They also do TV, film, or whatever. But I be honest, that's just a nightmare. You think raising money for your own business is hard. You try and raise money for films and TV, it's really, really hard. But anyway, people do it. I don't get involved in that. So if you're a television film company looking to make a programme, I'm not your person. But they do have a digital creative fund. They've actually spent up, but they've got what they call legacy funds, where they've invested in the past and now they've got it back. And there are basically 3 different funds. They have a loan fund, and if you're looking to spend if you need £100,000 or more, they will do a match fund deal. So say you go to the bank and say, I want 100 grand, and the bank say, well, we're only in for 50, too risky. These guys will match that 50 grand at a rate which I'm pretty sure now is 5%. So it's not expensive debt, depending on how your view of expensive is. In fact, no, we will talk about that. People ask me a lot, what do banks charge? Typically, bank rates are 0.5%, the base rate, plus a margin. So which is their profit margin. That's their price of money. So people ask me, well, what would they charge? You can probably get a deal if you're a massive company at 1.8% over base, 1.9. For normal businesses, you're probably talking somewhere between 3% and 6% over base. So then match it. This is a deal. This is to me quite a good deal at 5%. So it's a loan fund. So it's a match fund, and it goes up to 250 grand. So from 50,000 to 250. So you can, if you needed to borrow between 100 grand and 500 grand, that's a fund. But it's got to be a digital creative business. They also have They also have a very small equity fund. There's not a lot of money in there, but again, it's the same thing. It would have to get match funding. So say you need 100 grand of equity, and you can only raise 50, say by a business angel, then these guys would potentially come in and match that. And the other fund they have is something called the I Am Digital Fund. And this is a fund, you've got to be involved in digital creative work, and it has to have a social impact. And it's no secret they've invested in at least 2 companies that I know, one of which is based in Manchester called North Coders. I don't know if you know North Coders. They were in Sharp Project. They've just moved into town. Well, not just moved, they moved into town a while ago in Federation House. And they train youngish people to code on a 12-week course. So it not only, I mean, it is a profitable business, but it also has a social impact in as much as it trains young people how to code. And they've had a lot of success, really, in fact, loads of success. They're running courses left, right and centre. Yeah. So if you're in a digital creative business and it has a social impact, you can go for that fund. And to be honest, that fund is, my understanding is that fund has not been that well accessed by people. Yes?
That one there, so I took my lad on and he wants to do, he's learning himself coding. Is that something I could apply for to send him on?
You can send him to North Coders, but it'll charge you 6 grand.
So I'd have to then try and get some...
You'd have to find 6 grand. I'm pretty sure it's 6 grand for a course. I'm not an expert on North Coders pricing policy, but I'm pretty sure it's near or there 6 grand. Right. But my understanding is if they have the aptitude to do it, it is a very good course. But I don't actually know anyone who's been through it. There are loads of stuff on websites where they've shown people. I was on this course and now I'm an IT director at Mellon, you know, whatever.
Graham, what does the business need to look like to access that digital fund?
The business just it's a really tricky one. My suggestion is, to be honest, go on Creative England's website and just go, it's titled Investments, and then I think there's the 3 funds at the bottom, Debt Equity and I Am Digital. If you just have a look on there, it goes into a little bit more detail. Though there's another one called Turing Lab. Have a look at what those. If you have a look at what those businesses do, Turing Lab is something to do with getting digital into schools in a certain way. So it has a social impact as well as being profitable. So you just need to have a look. Funding from your pension fund. Yeah, looking around this audience, loads of pension funds there. I don't advise on this, but I know people who do fund the business from their pension fund. You can effectively invest some of your pension fund money in your business. It's a gamble. You're investing in your own business, let's be frank. You're investing your future in your own business. But then you do that anyway. Who else is lending? Right. Again, I understand here, maybe we don't have as many sort of businesses that buy assets. Assets being things like this. But what you tend to do is you pay a deposit for something and then you pay it back over a period of time. It's like a loan, but the loan is secured against that specific asset. So it could be this. So say this is grand, particularly you could theoretically asset finance this. But you can asset finance software. Some people I know asset finance software, not many, but you can. There are asset funders who will, if it's proprietary software, that they can then resell. Because what they care about, they want your business to succeed, but if it doesn't, they want their asset back so that they can sell it to somebody else. That's why they want a deposit, because they're never going to get the full price for it. So you pay a deposit and you pay back over time, or you can refinance assets. So if you have assets already, like 20 laptops, potentially you could refinance those, so borrow against those. And then if you don't pay them back, they come and take your laptops away. Invoice finance. This is quite important, although it's not relevant for any specific industry. It's relevant, arguably it's relevant for all industries. Invoice finance is a method by which when you invoice me, and I say, well, yeah, no, you invoice Tesco's. You invoice Tesco's in January, 10,000 tins of baked beans. They won't pay you to April, if you're lucky, or maybe May, because that's Tesco's and that's what they do. Now, obviously, you've got your 30-day payment terms, but they just ignore them. So So the problem is that you probably paid for those baked beans in January, and you manufactured and paid for them, paid your supplier. So you're out of pocket. So let's just say it cost you 10 grand to make them and you sell them for 20. But on a profit basis, you've sold 20 grand and your cost was 10 grand. You made 10 grand profit, yippee-dee. But what actually happened is you're minus 10,000 because you don't get paid till April, you're 20 grand. So what people do is they effectively borrow against that debt. So typically 85%, you could probably borrow, 17 grand, which allows you to then pay back your supplier. But then you've got sometimes you have a setup charge, a monthly maintenance charge for doing nothing, and then an interest charge. So that's what invoice finance is. It's got a bit better. This is there used to be a big thing called factoring. There's not as much factoring because factoring is actually when you sell your debt. So you sell your debt to me and then I go and collect it. People don't like that. So it's now called, they collect it, but it's called confidential invoice financing. So the company doesn't know that someone else has funded it. You can do single invoice finance. Now people used to get tied up with, you used to have to do all your debtor book, all your clients for a 12-month minimum period, sometimes 24-month minimum period. Now there are people who do single invoice. You can just pick one invoice and do that one invoice. So particularly if I've got a guy who's sold marketing services to Kellogg's. He owe him 30 grand. They promised it him last month. He still hasn't been paid. And it's a lot for his business. It's about 10% of his 10% of his turnover. He's owed 30 grand. So he can, and I've just put him onto a company this morning, saying, speak to these guys, they might finance that invoice for you. So you'll get 80% or 85% of 30 grand, and so let's make it 80%, which is 24 grand. So at least he's got some cash. But there's a price to pay for that, So, but all I'm saying is it's a way of raising funding. And you can even crowdfund. There are websites where you can put your invoice on and people bid for that invoice. So, but there's a price to pay.